just do a bit of a coronavirus check-in. We haven't done one, I think, for a little while, but we're going we're going through a fairly big wave at the moment. I guess there could be comparisons to if you look at the last pandemic with the Spanish flu, that the third year tended to be like the worst, and we're getting the most cases, most deaths, all that sort of thing. There are myths around certain things I've noticed, and it's amazing how messaging changes the public perception of their approach. There was 2 years where, like Australia in particular, and I'm sure it was the same in many other countries, where everyone was afraid of the virus and what it was doing, and a number count of 700 in one day was stopped the presses and shocked everyone. Now it's like no one ever even thinks about the numbers that are coming in every day. No one thinks about how many people are dying every day from it. But there's also, I think, a general kind of lax attitude that I think has kind of popped in as well, because of that feeling of wanting to be over it. So things like, it's just a cold now, so let's get on with it, kind of thing. It's like it's not as serious as what it used to be, or the idea that I've had it, so I'm good. Which the variants are, the new, sub-variants that are coming out are kind of playing havoc with that, with people getting reinfected multiple times now. Or even that I'll hang out for the variant-specific vaccine kind of thing. It seems that the change in the rhetoric and the thinking has I don't know how you'd call it. It's just interesting that it could change on a dime like that effectively so quickly, because it was only 8-9 months ago that people were still in the afraid stage, and a change of messaging has kind of changed everything back into the other direction now, to the point where people, I would say, have swung back to not being as careful as what they probably should be. And I'm not just saying that in terms of COVID. There's also just general sort of, how do you deal with the flu? How do you deal with colds? Stay home from work if you're sick. All that sort of basic stuff that people have just kind of thrown out the window because they all feel like they're done with it.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I think really what we're observing is human nature. Over the first 2 years, predominantly from the government and the health sector, we're well aware of the dangers of COVID and the need to restrict, the number of infections. And now, sort of, because we have had a vaccination program, although for reasons unique to COVID, it probably hasn't worked the way that we would have expected. And human nature is now that public are free and out of the box, so to speak. COVID is something that the bad effects of COVID are something that happens to someone else, and you can look at every disease or ailment of the human species, and typically people have that attitude, which is just natural human nature. It comes with benefits and it comes with disadvantages as well.
It'll be interesting. I mean, all common sense would probably point to the virus kind of going more mild over time, and then eventually we'll get a hold of it. But there's always a scenario potentially that a variant will pop up that makes things worse. And I don't know, I wonder what would happen in society if it turned out that a more significant variant of concern popped up that caused damage, and how that would affect how people would behave and react to it. It'll be interesting to see how that happens.
I think, human nature would mean that people get pretty frightened pretty quickly if it really turned out to be, significant proportions of the population under significant threat. I think the interesting thing with COVID is that the vaccination program probably hasn't worked quite the way that we would have expected. With the amount of variation in COVID now, vaccines will protect us from serious, cases and hospitalisation, but it really seems to be struggling with protecting us just from catching COVID, which is really quite unexpected. I think And when you're down to 12 weeks for a booster, you start to realise that we're probably doing our best from a public health perspective, but we obviously don't quite have the tools to defeat COVID yet. This will happen. Either a variant will come around that humans can grapple with and our immune systems can get on top of, and herd immunity comes through, or we get a new vaccine that tackles a whole lot of variants and negates COVID that way. But until then, we just have to be sensible. And as you pointed out, whether or not you get your booster shot maybe is one thing, but we should all be a little bit more careful about the potential for being a vector for carrying and spreading viruses. And I think COVID has been a good reminder to society of that.
Absolutely. And I guess one last thing, the discussion around where the virus emerged from has popped back into the headlines with a new study showing that it definitely emerged from the Wuhan Market based on more research or whatever. I don't think that, regardless of whether or not this study has merit or not, it's almost irrelevant in an environment where people are just going to believe what they believe anyway, and the lab theory always has an attractiveness to it for quite a few people in terms of, and they're probably not going to shake their views of it. And I just wonder if they even if this study, despite its attempts to draw some educated conclusions from it, even if they had a smoking gun evidence of where the virus came from, it still wouldn't actually register for good chunks of the population.
I think you're absolutely right. The purpose of understanding where the virus originated is a purpose of science. It's for infectious diseases of the future. It's for understanding how the virus came about, how it spread, and what steps we can better take to protect ourselves. It's not about pointing the finger to a location, which of course is how some of the wider media treats this. So, it started somewhere. We need to understand why it started, where it started, and what steps we can take in the future to prevent other outbreaks like this. Unless, of course, the whole world really does enjoy the threat of a pandemic.